What did people do on Pensacola Beach before it was Pensacola Beach? Hi, I'm Pensacola public historian Joe Vinson. I would like, if I may, to speak literally in this video. That's a little joke because this spelling of literal means relating to or situated on the shore. Pensacola Beach as we now know it didn't exist until a very specific date 95 years ago, June 13th, 1931. That's when the Pensacola Bridge Corporation opened the two privately funded bridges connecting Pensacola to Santa Rosa Island, and its subsidiary, the Pensacola Beach Corporation, opened the casino and fishing pier. The casino and pier were the attractions, and the bridges provided a way to get there by car. It wasn't a gambling casino, but a pavilion with dining and changing facilities. I'll talk more about it specifically another time. Before then, not only was it a lot harder to get to the beach, but most people weren't interested. For most of human history, the ocean and littoral spaces were largely regarded as places to be avoided. Europeans associated them with chaos and horror, shipwrecks and sea monsters. Why go to the beach? The water was undrinkable, the sand was bad for growing food, and confounded even simple transportation. That started to change after British doctor Richard Russell promoted his theory that seawater had medical benefits, which sparked the creation of seaside bathing resorts in fishing towns like Brighton and Scarborough. There were these big wheeled boxes called bathing machines that allowed women to change and go into the water without being seen by men. Obviously, this is still a long way from bikinis. With the Industrial Revolution, beaches became the place where people would go to escape the dense, polluted urban areas where they lived. Think of Atlantic City and Coney Island. On Santa Rosa Island specifically, for at least 1,000 years, Native Americans would come here for seasonal camps where they would catch fish and shellfish to take back to their inland settlements. Archaeologists have found evidence of short-term subsistence ventures on the island, shell middens and sherds dating back to the woodland period. Painter George Catlin has a well-known 1834 painting, for context that's 4 years after the U.S. passed the Indian Removal Act, showing a Creek or Choctaw family drying fish on Santa Rosa Island with these large drying hurdles outside of their hut. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they liked how the barrier island protected Pensacola Bay, though obviously, as Tristan de Luna learned in 1559, not enough protection from a hurricane. When the Spanish returned in the late 1600s, they named the island Santa Rosa after Rose of Lima, the first canonized saint born in the Americas. On the island's western point, called Punta de Sigüenza after geographer Carlos de Sigüenza y Góngora, they built a secondary fort that could fire upon enemy ships entering the pass. The main fort on the mainland, San Carlos de Austria, was destroyed by the French in 1719 during the War of the Quadruple Alliance. After a few years of nominal French control, the Spanish resettled Pensacola Bay again in 1722, this time on the island itself. This presidio, Isla de Santa Rosa, was on the northern bay side of the island. It was depicted in a 1743 drawing by French-born artist Dominique Serre, which in 1959 became the reference for the Spanish Village tourist attraction, part of the quadricentennial celebration. A few years later, Norman Simons actually discovered the site of the Presidio, which was remarkably well preserved, and subsequent excavations have found all sorts of great information. The island Presidio was destroyed in a 1752 hurricane, after which the Spanish moved one more time to what is now downtown Pensacola. Let's fast forward to the 1800s when Florida was a U.S. territory. Construction of Fort Pickens on Sigüenza Point took 5 years, from 1829 to 1834. It was held by Union forces for the entirety of the Civil War, and it became a destination for freedom seekers on the Underground Railroad. Check out Matthew Clavin's book, Aiming for Pensacola, for more about that. After the Civil War, Santa Rosa continued to be owned by the federal government as a military reservation. There was a pretty terrible explosion at Fort Pickens in 1899, and they were testing lots of different types of artillery and ordnance, much of which went unexploded for decades and are still being recovered. The U.S. Life Saving Service built a life-saving station near Fort Pickens in 1885, one of only 2 in Florida at the time, which was intended to help mariners whose ships wrecked near Pensacola Pass. They had these little boats they could launch from the beach to go rescue people in need. But the late 1800s and early 1900s is also when the trend of saltwater bathing that I mentioned came to Pensacola. People would sign up for steamer boat excursions out to Santa Rosa Island. Often these were organized by churches or fraternal organizations or as a benevolent society fundraiser. There would be refreshments and maybe a band would be hired to play music. And the life-saving station was a common destination on the island because nothing else had been built. But eventually, some entrepreneurs saw the value in creating something more. Because the island was owned by the War Department, they had to ask for permission. A man named Charles Burton was the first approved to open the Santa Rosa Surf Bathing Establishment in 1902. This was during segregation, so it would have been only for white people. But a year later, the War Department granted permission for a group of black residents to open their own surf bathing pavilion nearby. There were many others who got into the excursion business and built pavilions on the island, but probably the most successful was Captain Benny Edmondson. In 1903, he started ferrying bathers to the life-saving station and to see battleships aboard 2 different launches. These were heavily advertised in local papers and in signage by the waterfront. His fleet expanded, and people could fish and hunt on these excursions too. In 1910, Edmondson opened a resort called the Gulf Beach Inn, where people could actually stay overnight if they wanted to. Probably the first example of a hotel on Pensacola Beach, it was heavily damaged in a July 1916 hurricane. A new place called the Surf Inn opened in 1919, but construction of the Gulf Beach Highway in the 1920s pulled attention away from Santa Rosa Island. Why would you take a boat when you could just drive to Gulf Beach, known today as Perdido Key? Gulf Beach was considered the future of the burgeoning tourism industry, and unlike Santa Rosa Island, it would have the infrastructure to support tourists, namely the Escambia Hotel being built by Theo Bars. When the land bubble burst in 1926, the financing for the hotel project, already under construction, fell apart. The concrete skeleton of the unfinished building sat there until the 1990s. But in 1927, right after the Gulf Beach project fizzled, plans were announced for the Pensacola Bay and Santa Rosa Sound bridges that would connect Pensacola to Santa Rosa Island. That same year, the War Department sold the entire island to Escambia County for $10,000, eventually leading to the Pensacola Beach we all know and love today. I hope you enjoyed learning about the history of early Pensacola Beach. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments what I should cover next.